Okay, hi everybody. I'm Lou, and this is our first Midnight Tide Publishing Roundtable. And today we're gonna talk process and like getting started in the process. And I have GD Roman, MA Brown, Nancy O'Toole, and Whitney L Spradling with me here. So let's do intros. I'm Lou, and I write Witches of Moondale, Hunters of Ironport, and a bunch of other stuff. I do a lot of queer stories with banter and magic and fun stuff. All right, GD, let's do your intro.
Hi, I'm GD Roman. I'm the author of the Bound Island series. Book 1 came out in November. I pretty much for now write fantasy and romance, but romance is like secondary in the story. But I love character-centered stories. And book 2 is coming out this year.
Awesome. All right, MA, your intro.
Hi, I'm MA Brown. I just published The Songs That Beckon like 3 days ago, which is the first in the Travelers series. It's fantasy, dark fantasy with romance, lots of magic, and grief. And the next book will come out eventually.
Okay, Nancy.
Hi, I apologize if you can hear my computer. I just realized that the fan is struggling right now. But hi, my name is Nancy O'Toole. I write superhero fiction with the Red and Black series. I write fairy tale retellings with the Twin Kingdoms series. And on Wednesday, I have my first Portal fantasy, which is coming out. It's called The Mirror Guardian.
And Whitney.
Yeah, I'm Whitney Spradling. I write paranormal and fantasy romance with all the spice. I have the Fates, first 2 Fates book of the Fates trilogy out, and the Flames of Curse Realms with the Flames and Curses and of Smoke and Betrayal, and then Those We Couldn't Burn is my Witch Enemies to Lovers book.
Awesome. All right, so our first question is, where do you get your ideas and what usually instigates that in your initial spark? So let's start with Whitney.
Okay. You're picking on me. Okay, my ideas. I don't know. They just kind of, usually I get my ideas from either a song lyric that will speak to me or a quote that I hear. But typically it's something along those lines, and then I just kind of flesh it out from there. Or a lot of times it'll just like an opening line or the opening paragraph will come to me, and I'll just kind of take it from there. It's not really very helpful. I'm currently working on a retelling, so I'm kind of doing research on based off the original book, and you know, running my ideas through that. That doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Whitney's having a bad time right now, everybody. So we're gonna cut her some slack because we are. All right. So
Thanks.
who do you want to shoot the question to next?
How about GD? Go for it.
Well, Bound Island is the first book I've published, but most of the time I listen to music and just like images pop into my brain. So it's a lot, pretty much inspired of what I'm seeing in my head that's unfurling per se. So I listen to a lot of like anime music because I don't understand a thing that they're saying, but it's really like it has like a story element to it. I think the way they use music. So a lot of it started like that. So just sitting down and listen to music, and I just see images start popping up, and then I can probably like map out a scene. But if I'm going to write a real story, have structure and have depth, I usually draw on people that I know or experience that I've had. So for example, the Bound Island series, I have 3 sisters, and I was really inspired by 3 of my friends from high school. Mostly the dynamic between them, not really. I was there, but they're not like carbon copies of these people. And then little by little, they start having their own personalities. So what I'm discovering a lot is I see a scene or I see the character inspired in my head by music, and then I just start building the story around it. I do a lot of I do add a lot of elements in my story of things that I found significant. For example, I could read a book. I love classical literature. So, for example, if I've read The Three Musketeers, I can probably do a shout out to The Three Musketeers in the book of a certain situation that I've read. Bound Island is inspired by Arthurian lore. So there's a lot of Arthurian elements in there. And there's going to be an Arthurian element in one of the books as well. So it's like it can start like that. But then I start adding like to the pot a lot of different things that I experience to be able to build it up and create it as its own per se.
Okay,
So-
let's go with M. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you were saying who do I was going to judge? Yeah, I was going to say MA.
Okay.
Okay. All right. The initial spark for a story. I don't know. Oftentimes it comes from dreams. I have very vivid dreams, and so it's usually where I find my characters is in my dreams. I draw a lot of like my worlds from nature. I don't know. I take like a pond in nature, for example, and I like pick out all the rocks, and then I'll draw a little map, and that's my world. And the rocks are islands, and the pond's the water. And so then I drop my characters in that world and see where it goes. And then also songs, like Judy said, I have songs I play on repeat. Lots of classical and movie scores, because those are just, I don't know, very adventure-y. And then I have one work in progress, and this is the first time it's ever happened to me, but it was inspired by a singular phrase. It was inspired by the phrase "the dead post," and I loved that phrase so much, and it's just I built the whole world around that. So I don't know, really, all kinds of random moments just inspire the stories, and then yeah, that's it.
All right, Nancy, you're up.
Sure thing. So like Whitney, I've written retelling. So obviously some of the ideas came from that. And like MA, I'm also inspired by my dreams sometimes. I also have very vivid, strange dreams. And that's a good source of inspiration. But for me, my inspiration, they come all over the place. Conversations, like maybe a book that I'm really enjoying. The Red and Black series was actually inspired in large part by a video game. City of Heroes, which is very old school now, but for the time, it had this really in-depth character creator where you could really customize what you wanted your powers to be and what your outfit was. And after spending all this time building this character and naming this character, and then deciding I'm going to spend dozens of hours with her, a backstory began to form, which was fantastic. And also very bad. It was a very bad backstory that fortunately I ended up throwing out before I started writing the actual book that would become the Red and Black series. But yeah, I get my ideas all over the place. I think, part of being a writer is just being really open for them.
And me personally, where I usually get my initial spark is I consume a lot of media. Meaning I watch a lot of TV, I watch a lot of anime, I listen to a lot of music, I read a lot of books. And sometimes a lot of my stories start with just like a question. Like what would happen if, for example, my Sea Witch series, what would happen if the Sea Witch wasn't really trying to hurt the Little Mermaid? What would happen if the Sea Witch had been in love with the Little Mermaid's mother and was trying to protect her or help her to that degree, to some degree? And then everything just kind of spawns from that question. So yeah, that's kind of my initial spark is usually just a weird question. Like, and also the Fae of Eventide series was like I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw these computer generated images of like houses and dresses, and I was like, oh, Fae Mafia. Just where it just came out of nowhere. So I don't have any like really solid answer for that question, unfortunately. Terrible. All right, so our next question is, do you start with a character, a world, or a plot? And I know personally I start with characters. The characters talk to me first, and then they build up over time, but usually it's a line of dialogue. They just start talking and then I figure out who they are and how they fit into everything as we go along. So GD, where do you start?
Well, I think I start out with the characters. I build them up first, at least get to know them a little bit. And then I start building a world around them. So with the girls in the beginning, I knew I really was into Arthurian lore at the beginning. So it was like I really wanted it to be an island, but at the same time, the girls were being a little bit more louder. So I started to get to know them at that time when I started the story. But I'm discovering that I love getting to know the characters a little bit more before I put them in a certain place. And then I create the place and see them interact. So I think it's like character first and then the space, and then like the plot starts manifesting itself.
Okay. Nancy, where do you start?
To me, it really depends on the project. For the Mirror Guardian, my upcoming Portal Fantasy, a large part of it was just inspired by the pandemic, to be perfectly honest. But I've also had this sort of long-standing image in my mind of this woman who ends up falling into a parallel universe and needs some sort of armor to protect her. And once I decided that that was an idea that I wanted to flesh out, I started to basically figure out who she was as a person and what was her backstory and why was she going through these things and what type of a world was she going to travel to and explore. And then from that point, the story, the plot, and the side characters and their journeys sort of built up around her.
Whitney, you're next.
For me, I almost want to say more of the world comes to me first. For Flames and Curses, it was the opening paragraph came to me, which was a little bit more, it was kind of a character development because it had Lainey involved in it, but it was also more about her world. So once I had that opening paragraph, I just kind of went from there, kind of building her and the world at the same time. For Fates, it was more of the world for me. I knew it was going to be a white shoes, so I knew I was going to have at least the three guys, but I knew the world. I kind of built up my world first, where it was going to be that dark and kind of gritty, unfair. You know, the magicals have all the power, and the humans are kind of treated very poorly, and so it's really for me kind of the world. And my Wizard of Oz retelling that I'm working on right now, I built up my world way before I'd started even kind of working on my characters. So I think I'm more world first and then characters.
MA, where do you start?
It depends on where the initial like spark of inspiration comes from. Sometimes I see the world first and sometimes I see the characters first. With the Songs That Beckon, I saw my main character first. I saw her just as a sad girl holding a string of keys, and I started by asking questions like, why does she have the keys? Why is she sad? And it's the same process with the world. I'm like, okay, what are the people in this world like? And then the character develops from there. So it just depends on where the inspiration comes from. But yeah, I just ask them questions basically.
Okay, so I'm going to skip around a little bit here because I created these questions and now I realize that there's a better order for them as I'm looking at them. So what's your process like after the initial spark? Nancy.
So I spent a lot of time thinking, just to start off with, thinking about what I want to write. I take a lot of walks, which is a good time for either working on world building or working your way through plot problems. And then once I feel confident enough that what I have is enough to support a good story and isn't like derivative of a past work, which is something you do have to worry about once you have written, a few books, I start to make a lot of notes. And when I mean, like, I sit around for weeks and just make notes and notes and notes and notes. And once I think I have a good enough sort of launch pad, I dive into that first draft and I hope for the best. And then at that point, once the first draft is completed, I go through 2 really, really thorough rounds of revision for self-edits. and then the beta readers, and then the professional edits. So, yeah.
Okay, Whitney, what is your process like after the initial spark?
Depending on what the book is, like for my Wizard of Oz retelling, once I kind of had my idea, I sat down and read the original the Wonderful Wizard of Oz book and started kind of pulling apart pieces that I wanted to include and not include, and did some more research on the aspects of I wanted to kind of have a kind of be based off of more like an Italian folklore, which it turns out is very hard to find. It's much more prominent to be finding, you know, the Scottish and Celtic folklore, and it's hard to dig through the Italian stuff. But so I did a more of like a research dive for this book. But for my others, I just I don't plot. I'm not good at plotting. I don't like to plot, so I just start writing, and I kind of just go where it takes me and hope for the best. So it's usually just have the idea and then start writing, unless I need to do a little bit more digging. But yeah.
Okay, GD, where do you go after the initial spark?
Well, since I'm still discovering a little bit of how I'm working, because each book has been pretty different. I mean, I have written stories before where I just write down a story and I start like the same thing, just pantsing through the book. Just I saw the characters. I did it a lot in the pandemic where I just write. But I've discovered that what happens after I have that initial idea is I want to know how it ends. So my brain I do the same as Nancy. I just go for walks and listen to a lot of music and just say, okay, these are my characters. This might be the world. How will this story end? What's the ending? And once I have that ending very, very clear, this is how the story is going to end. This is the last scene of the book. I build back from that. So I'm saying, okay, what do my characters go through to go get to that? So with this series, for example, I always had with book one, the beginning and the ending. I knew how the book was going to end. I knew how it was going to begin. I didn't have anything in the middle. So what I started to do was build up certain important scenes that would pop into my brain and just list them. Okay, point of view, blah, 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 point of view, blah, 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 and have like a list in my phone of scenes in a Google Doc that I just punch out. And I take a couple of days just adding scenes. And then once I have like around 12 scenes that are really, really good, I then start building around those scenes. So I'm a little bit of like a mix of a plotter and a pantser, because sometimes I make a scene that doesn't have nothing to do. It just doesn't work. And then I can start drafting. And I usually draft it a mess. I draft whatever I want, the scene that I want, the scene that I'm feeling at the time, which is terrible because then I have to go back and restructure the whole thing. But I need always to have the ending. I need to know exactly where the characters are going to end, the last scene of the book, and then I just build myself up to that scene. So that's how it works for me.
All right, MA, what is your process like after the initial spark?
I'm actually a bit like Nancy and Nina with the notes. I have or GD, sorry. I have the notes on my phone. I have Microsoft Office on it, so it syncs across devices, and I just have running just mind gibberish. Like anytime I have an idea for a story, it just gets thrown into like a different document, and then I always have my beginning and I have my end and maybe a scene or two in the middle, and I just sort of write it chaotically and string it all together in the end and hope it makes sense. And then I do revisions. And then I like having alpha readers, but I think I like beta readers more. I think I might stop having alpha readers because their advice almost ends up being irrelevant after developmental edits and things change. But yeah, that's my general process.
So my process has changed a lot over the years. The first book I wrote, I didn't outline at all. But my current process, which really seems to work, and so I've kind of solidified that this is how I do things, is I get the initial idea, and I throw it in a notebook with all my other initial ideas. And as it starts to develop, it gets a couple of pages where it's like dialogue and stuff. And then once it gets to the point where it's too big for those 2 pages, it gets its own notebook. And the notebook gets the world building and the dialogue and all that plot nonsense. And then I outline. And after I outline, then I start writing, and I write beginning to end. And after I outline, then I do a personal alpha read, and I'll make changes. And then I send it to beta readers. And then, of course, it goes to the editor and all the I cannot talk today. All the developmental edits and everything after that. So yeah, that's my process. So let's go with. So we've talked a little bit about this. So this is just a question that's going to be really easy to answer. Plot versus pantsing. Whitney.
Definitely pantsing. I feel if I have, I don't say that I don't plot at all. I have kind of a very loose outline, and it's really actually in my head more than anything. I I know where I want my characters to go. I know what I want to happen. But if I have a detailed outline of what's going to happen, then I feel stuck in that, even though I know I can veer away from it. My autism says, nope, this is what you have to do. So I get really stuck in that outline. So rather than and then I feel like my writing will just get stale because things will be happening and I'll be like, oh, I really want to do this, but I can't because this is what the outline says. And yeah, so I don't do that. I just go with the flow. Let things happen how they happen.
Okay. Do you plot or pants, MA?
I'd say it's definitely leans more pantsing. Yeah, I have a list of scenes, but I deviate from it all the time. So yeah, definitely more pantsing.
And what do you do, Nancy?
I'm definitely more of a plotter. But the challenge that I frequently come up with against is sometimes what plotting Nancy thinks is a great idea is not always the best idea in practice. And I don't know if that's too unusual. I mean, we've all seen like that TV show or read that book when you find a person that does something so incredibly out of character and you kind of wonder in the back of your mind, it's like, oh, that's what they kind of planned on having the big twist be, but they didn't necessarily take the time to set it up well, or they didn't necessarily realize that maybe it sounded like a cool idea, but in practice it doesn't actually make sense. Figuring out when to stick to your guns and when to pivot based on what feels best for the characters and the stories can be a little challenging, but yeah, I spend a lot of time planning, and sometimes I throw all those plans out the window.
Okay, GD, do you plot or pants?
I think I do a bit both. I mean, I plot a lot, at least the basic outline of all the scenes, so I can because I have a lot of point of views in my books. In the first book, I had 3, and the second book, I'm gonna have 3. And so I need to keep them all like together per se, so I don't mix them up. So what I try to do is at least plan basic structures on the scenes. At least like literally, it's like POV so and so. This happens. And then when I'm writing, like literally, it's either even color coordinated. But when I'm writing the scene and I'm in the middle, I discover that whatever I wrote down has nothing. It doesn't go with that scene. It doesn't connect with what's going to happen next. So I just keep writing and then realize that what I plotted is not going to work. So I may plot a really good structure with a lot of like notes, but as I'm writing, I start feeling what's going on in the story. And sometimes I just write a scene that I just take out this doesn't work, and I just block it and put it in a paper and just keep writing. So I think I'm a little bit of most. I have enough flexibility to be able to cut and paste and take out what I don't need, and to let the characters also like push me. But I need to know, I need to have a structure because of all the points of view. If not, I would just go crazy.
And I personally outline. I feel like if I don't outline, I get to the middle of the story and then my brain kind of goes, yeah, okay, but what about this other thing we could be writing? So I need to outline because it just keeps me going. But I don't adhere strictly to my outline in any way. I actually rewrote the outline for Overkill, I think like 3 times, because the characters just I got toward the middle and they were like, nope, that's not how it's happening now, and I'm like, super great. So I have enough. I usually put it in a Word doc, and I keep the Word doc up on one side and the manuscript on the other, and then I'll make changes as I go. And my outlines aren't like scene for scene. It's just like, oh, this thing needs to happen, so this thing can happen, so that thing can happen, and just down the line. All right, so let's go with how do you research your or your story, MA?
I sort of just discovery write, I suppose, and then if I come up against something that I don't know how to do or I can't imagine how to do it, I'll research it. Like for the songs that back in, I didn't know how to pick a lock, but my main character does. So I had to look up lock picking, and they go into a mine, and I didn't know how mines were laid out, so I had to look that up. So I just sort of, go with it, and if I hit a problem, I'll research it. I do when I'm sort of in the like developmental stage, when I'm like kind of coming up with ideas for the story, I do read a lot of folklore and like mythological creature books and stuff like that. More for inspiration though, I feel like, than research. So yeah, just kind of go with it and see where the story takes me, and then research as I need.
Okay, Whitney, how do you research?
Yeah, very similar to MA. I don't do a whole lot of research unless I hit a snag. Except with this Wizard of Oz, I did do a little bit more of a deep dive into Italian folklore because that's kind of the twist I wanted to put on this. But again, it was also kind of more for inspiration, really, than actual research. But yeah, not a whole lot. Like just when I need it.
All right, GD, how do you research for your books?
I'm a very visual, so what I actually do start with a Pinterest board. I sit with my phone for like while I'm watching TV, and I start adding things to the Pinterest board of what my character would look like, what this place would find out. So I start putting it together, and then I actually label like character 1, character 2, character 3. After I'm done with that, I create in Google Docs a huge thing. It's like a big box of information. I'm sorry, language is avoiding me right now, where I literally have like possible title, and I organize all that stuff. So I copy and paste pictures and images and start developing the characters. So I do a lot of, I do try to research and make mostly the characters. I really want them to feel like real people. Like I want you to be able to sense what are their strengths, their weaknesses, even though maybe I don't mention it all in the story. What characteristic really draws them out. And as I'm learning about the characters, I start learning about the place that's going to happen, where they are, and the other stuff starts popping out, like what magic system works here. A lot of the research that I do, I start just like building up a framework to work with. So I have images, pictures. Sometimes I never use them and I erase them, but I have like just a frame of all the things that could happen. And then when I'm like visually saturated with all that, with Pinterest, with quotes, I even have a lot of quotes that I can connect to the story, or similar stories that I'm using as a framework. So for example, I research a lot of, like for book 1, I did a lot of research about the Fates. I did a lot of research about Arthurian lore, specifically like what is Avalon as an island, what is Celtic lore and things like that were in the original manuscript that didn't make the cut, but I had it all there in that big document. It turned out like 30 pages. And it becomes like the master document. So I have like scenes that I really liked, and I just wrote them down on my phone, which is like a dialogue. Once I have all that, I can sit down and write. But I do a lot of, I wouldn't say it's like structured research. I just have like a lot of time where I just get a lot of information, little visual and everything, so the story feels really organic and clear in my head. If not, it's just like white wall syndrome, because I'm really, really visual. And once that's all done, that's when I can start writing. And I research the same thing as I go. Like I have no fighting experience, so I end up watching videos of Taekwondo and saying, okay, how do I describe this? Like this is a kick, this is that, or like medicinal herbs. There are a lot of medicinal herbs in book 2, and I have to research that and just have to put it in, right? and I can do as I go, but everything else has to be built before.
Okay, Nancy, how do you research?
So I am not a huge fan of research. It's why I don't like historical fiction, despite the fact that I love reading it. But as mentioned before, I do a lot of, thinking about ideas and taking notes and stuff like that, which naturally leads to questions, and that naturally leads to research to answer those questions. For example, for the Mirror Guardian, it takes place in this other world, but I knew that for my portal fantasy, that I wasn't going to be writing about this sort of lush living world like Narnia. I'm writing about a world that's been through an apocalypse. So there is no life, there are no people, there are no animals, there's no vegetation, there's nothing. So the only thing that's on this world are the gods that people that used to worship. And that got me thinking a lot about, so, okay, what would a dead world really be like? Would it be like to experience something like that? And there's a scene where the characters, they go to sort of this ocean setting. And I'm like, what would that smell like? Which led down a research hole to sort of figure that out. Like I find sometimes when it comes to research, like a lot of times it's about finding details that will sort of make your world feel more lush and more realistic. But sometimes it's about finding the things that if you make a mistake, it would really take the reader out of the story. And that's kind of what would happen when I was researching, what it would be like. It would not smell the same if you're curious. So.
And the way I research is, well, it changes from book to book. But particularly with the Bay of the Dead verse series, because of the fact that each of those books, I got the initial idea when I was really busy and didn't have time to write them. I actually I made myself research a lot about a lot of different things, just so that I would waylay the writing. So for Moondale, I looked up a lot of, I read an encyclopedia about witches, and I looked up a lot of craft books and that kind of thing. For Hunters of Ironport, I read a lot of vampire stuff, watched a lot of vampire movies. For Fae of Eventide, I have a big Fae encyclopedia that I'm reading to try and get ideas and pin down some things. And then I also read books in the same genre. So when I was first writing Witches of Moondale, I read a lot of witch books. When I was first writing Hunters of Ironport, I read a lot of vampire books. And that's basically how I deal with the whole research issue. Okay. So we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but how much inspiration do you take from real life, MA?
For my book, quite a bit. It was difficult to not put it in there because I was writing about grief while I was experiencing it. So yeah, at least for that book, I put a lot of real life experience in there. I wouldn't say that's my norm. I do take some character traits from real people, but not necessarily experiences. But yeah, so for the songs that beckon, yeah, I did take a lot of personal feelings, but not usually, just to like small little character traits from people.
GD, how much do you take from real life?
A lot, actually. I feel, well, at least as I'm building my characters and I understand them more, I try to put, like, I would call it little shout outs to things that have happened to me. So a lot of, I wouldn't say everything, but there are certain things that I write down in books or interactions with characters that have to do with things that I have experienced. For example, in book 1, which is it's not really a spoiler, but it's true. I've had a lot of shout outs or a lot of callbacks that there's like a love triangle in book 1, which there isn't, and people don't understand that there isn't. But one of my characters, Lena's in love with a guy named Aiden, and Aiden's in love with her sister. And Tara and Aiden have been like together forever, but Lena's in love with him. And people are like, yeah, but that's a love triangle, and Aiden's a flirt, or he's like, you stringing Lena along, but the truth is that no, that's not true. Though when I was in high school, I was in love with at the time, full disclosure, I had a huge crush on my best friend's boyfriend. And he was the nicest guy. He treated me the best way possible. He was super sweet with me, but he was always in love with her and never in love with me. And reality, those types of nuances that relationships in reality give, they make the characters or these things feel more authentic. So I always try to observe how people interact or take things that I've learned from other relationships or other people and just put them into my characters and situations. And I really like that. So I feel like even though I build fantasy, everything that my characters experience is based off something that I've learned from other people or something that I've experienced. So I think it takes a lot from real life. And I also have a lot of tiny little tidbits of my own like cultural background that I'm going to start putting in the books. So I think there's a lot of reality in my books that if a person starts reading, they might feel it's not real, but I've experienced it.
Okay, Nancy.
Sure, just kind of building off of something that Gigi said, because you talked about like, oh, you write fantasy, but you do pull from realistic stuff. And that's really true for me as well. I mean, I think a lot of times, like, you know, the fantastical can exist as a lens to take stuff that seems emotional or even difficult and hard and sort of view them from a fair distance and examine them. Like, for example, like reemerging into the real world post-pandemic was a really weird experience for me. Like going through, you know, this prolonged period of isolation and then getting out into a world that felt toxic and hostile was a lot. So, you know, but instead of writing about that from a literal sense, you know, I have my protagonist in the Mirror Guardian, Eden, who literally travels after a period of prolonged isolation to a world where the environment is so toxic that if she breathes it in for more than a few minutes, she will die painfully without protection. And the only living beings are the gods that people used to worship, and they are rather hostile. So I don't necessarily have any interest in writing like an autobiographical story, like from the idea of pulling from real life that way. Like, let's be honest, no one wants to read about Nancy the librarian. My life is really not all that interesting. I'm a cataloger. I spend most of my days like like doing like data entry and picking books for the library to buy, which I love, but it doesn't make for compelling fiction. But I do like the idea of taking like real emotions that you've experienced or witnessed other people experience and using that as a way to draw on inspiration for making books that are compelling.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, I was and then I'll go to Whitney. I just wanted to say something real quick before I forgot. I was talking about this with my dad the other night, and he goes, "Well, you're a professional liar because you're a writer." And I'm like, "Yeah, but writers lie so they can tell the truth. We write fiction, we tell lies so that we can make you feel something that's real. So we lie to tell the truth." Okay, now Whitney.
Yeah, so I think most of my characters get a piece of me, a little piece somewhere along the way. Maybe I like twist it a little bit. Like Ellis has a lot of trauma, and hers is vastly different from mine. But I used my experiences with my trauma for her. And then my Daisy, my character for my Wizard of Oz retelling, is she's going to be me 100%. I'm giving her all of my anxiety and my OCD and all of my weird little quirks, and she's going to be it's going to be a very interesting insight into my head when people read her. But I also will throw in in my second Fates book, These Deadly Dreams, I did throw in a fun anecdotal real life experience that I experienced from high school. That at the time, I mean, when you're in high school, it's like everything's the end of the world because you're always so dramatic. But it was oh my gosh, I was a sophomore, maybe freshman or sophomore, and I was at a dance, and something very, very embarrassing happened to me, and I used that in my book as a funny little way to help my two characters to connect a little bit, to help kind of calm her anxiety. But so I will use real life experiences, but most of my characters will get a little piece of me along the way as well. And it's usually my mental health issues that they get. So
Yeah, I kind of play. I do a lot of what Whitney does. I say this a lot. All my characters they start with the kernel of me, and then I build off of them. So they have some of my ticks, some of my hobbies, some of my habits, and then I build off of like one or two pieces and make a full character. But I also will pull like just real life funny stories and insert them. The second book of Hunters of Ironport actually has this really funny scene with Eric and a spider. Because I came downstairs one night and I live with my brother, and my brother is standing in the middle of the kitchen with a slipper, and I'm like, "What you doing?" And he's like, "There's a spider," and I'm like, "Okay, but where is it?" He's like, "It's in the other room." I'm like, "Why are you here?" He's like, "Mom's gonna kill it." I'm like, "Okay." So I actually gave Eric that had Hunter have that moment where he comes in and Eric's standing there with his slipper, and he's like, "What you doing?" So I do take those real life things, and I take a lot of like relationship stuff, like how I see other people interact with their relationships, how I've interacted with relationships prior to this. There are some characters that were not so nice that have been inspired by people that were not so nice to me previously in life, and it becomes very cathartic to deal with those instances and to just be like, yeah, I'm gonna make that person not exist anymore for a little while in this book. So yeah, I think we all do that to a certain extent. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this, but I think we can go a little more in depth with it. Everybody's process changes a little from book to book. So talk about how your process has changed from book to book. Let's go with GD.
Well, I always say the same thing. Book one was a project that ended up being a book. It started with me being like, book one was very strange to write because I picked it up on and off for like every decade. So I started when I was 18, picked it up 10 years later when I was 28, and then picked it up again. So I really didn't have a process at all of what I was doing. I didn't understand that there could be a process. I just went with it, and it turned out to be an overwhelming project, and it's pretty big. Now, with everything else that I'm working on, I realize that I could be a little bit more structured. I could give myself more time to really plan a book and not just go with the characters. Nothing against that, except that it's it was pretty big. It's just I went overboard. I ended up doing more word count. I ended up going crazy. I realized that it was better just to have a little bit more order, to do less and do it better than do too much and do it wrong. So book one turned out I planned through it. I didn't even know, actually, full disclosure, I did have a magic system in book one. I finished the book and goes like, oh, I'm going to have this into a series. And what's the rest of the world going to look like? It's like, oh my God, how am I going to end the series? So once the book was finished and actually already in edit, I sat down and planned the rest of the series. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have anything. But then when I realized book 2, 3, and 4, I said I was not going to do that again. I'm going to sit down and really have clear what's going to happen. What's the structure? What is this? And it has been so much better writing. I feel a little bit more confident. It was really chaotic for book one. So I think from one book to another, at least with fantasy, because I think it would be different with my play contemporary novel, I would say that it works that I was super going like glancing through it, had no idea what was going on, just let the characters run the show, the magic system made no sense, yada yada yada. That's the book, hello, goodbye, published. And then realized that I made a bunch of mistakes and plot holes that were huge that I didn't know I was going to fill. And then I sat down and just had made the list of all this stuff and said, I'm going to close everything here. This is this, it's going to be closed here. And I just planned it. And that really changed it. So I think that's what made it different from one book to another.
Okay, Nancy, how does your process change?
Quite a bit, as you might expect. I mean, I've been writing since I was a kid, and I've been writing seriously with plans of publication for over a decade now. Like before I wrote Red and Black, I have several trunked novels that will gladly never see the light of day. But one thing that basically the biggest change that has happened over times is going from someone that just sort of came up with an idea for a scene and wrote, and then saw where things went, and someone that did a little more planning, kind of similar to how Jeannie talked before. I do a lot more planning now than I used to. And as a result, I finished more books, especially when I was writing as a teenager and in college and in my 20s. I didn't complete a lot of stories. I was the person with the laptop filled with half-done books that never even made it to any sort of revision phase. And bringing in that element of planning has really helped me write finished books for one thing, and stronger books. But I do also think that there is a bit of a change depending from book to book. Writing something like The Mirror Guardian, which is a kind of a chunky book, it's about 500 pages, versus writing a novella is just going to be a different experience. It's not necessarily easier to write a smaller book, but it is less complex, at least for me.
Okay, Whitney, how has your process changed from book to book?
For me, my first duet, I guess you'd call it, I had no idea what I was doing. I started, I've always had the dream to publish, and so during COVID, I just said, I have the time, let's do it. And I didn't know what I was doing, and I rushed the whole thing. I was just in that phase of, oh my gosh, I want to publish a book and be able to say, hey, I published a book, look at me. So there were a lot of mistakes that I made that I definitely learned from. And for me, one thing that I'm actively working on is I have a hard time with just kind of writing and letting it be as it is for my first draft. I want my first draft to be perfect, so I don't. And I'm trying to work on letting that go, and knowing that I can go back and edit. I can add things here and there that I know I'm going to need to add, but it's really hard for me. But I'm noticing the more that I let myself do that, the better I feel about the writing, better I feel about the work. So that's something that I'm actively trying to work on for myself. But for me, it's more just been a learning process of, I mean, I have quite a few books published now, but I'm still a baby author, and I'm still learning. Obviously, I think we all continue to learn as we write. So I'm still trying to learn what works best for me, and what I can do to make it easier for me and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Okay, MA, how has your process changed from book to book?
Well, with my first book, I just sort of like Whitney said, I just really I wanted to get it right the first time. I wanted to get it out and be published. I don't know, I really wanted to race through it. But I also had it in my head that I had to do everything chronologically from start to finish. But I pantsed it. So I ended up hitting a lot of self-inflicted plot holes, I guess you could say, because I didn't plot it out very well. And I would get stuck, and then I'd get frustrated, and I'd put it down, and I'd not touch it for months. And it actually took 5 years to get a first draft, and then I put it down for a year because I didn't like it. And then it took a year, a little less than a year, to rewrite it. And that's when I realized I was doing it all wrong. And so with the novella that comes after, I wrote the crustiest, nastiest looking draft ever, with tons of parentheses that say, insert this here, or find a name for a character here, just so I could get it done. And then I'm going to set it aside for much less time than I did the first one, and do rewrites and add everything back in when I feel, I don't know, more settled with the draft, I guess. So I wrote, let's see, I think it took 3 months to do the novella draft, which significantly shorter time frame than 5 years for the first book. But yeah, I think I need to let my brain skip over the hard places. So learned to let the first draft be, and then I can go back in and fix it and make it a million times better later.
And for me, my process changes from book to book. In my process is more of evolved than it has changed. I tried a thing with Villainous Heroics, where Heroics I wrote the ending first to see if I liked it. Decided I didn't really care for it. It was cool to have the ending written, but then I had to rewrite the ending, so I was like, meh. And with the Heir to Munda series, I had to do a lot more in-depth outlining with that because of the fact that it is built more like a serial than anything else. So it's got like a big overarching arc, and then it's got a lot of small arcs in it, and I had to plot each of those to make sure they made sense. With the Bay of the Dead verse, all those books have kind of been very similar because they're all similar genre. I've dealt with them very much alike because the fact that I've done about the same amount of world building. They're all in the same universe. So, but I'm realizing now that I'm a couple books deep that I didn't write down all the stuff that I need to write down, like where things are located and how many rooms are in a house, and like stuff that's going to come up later that I need to remember. So I'm going to have to go back through and reread those books and write all that stuff down. And then I also do, I think I'm the only one out of us who's doing a co-author projects, right? Yeah. Okay. So co-authoring is also an entirely different experience because we sit down and we plot the entire thing out, and then we'll write it and we go back and forth alternating chapter to chapter. But like with L, I'll go and I'll write my chapter and be like, so I moved the thing that was supposed to be in my chapter to your chapter because it didn't fit in my chapter. And she'll like, okay. and Tiss will do it to me too. And so it's a lot more collaborative, and that's a completely different experience too that I find really interesting. And we're on our last question. Yay. Everybody's happy about that, I'm sure. Is there a story structure or a craft book that has helped you in finding your process? So let's go with Nancy. Sorry, I think I muted too early. You didn't catch. Let's go with Nancy.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. So craft books, yeah. So I read Save the Cat, and I did find it to be a really interesting, solid read. But I must admit, craft books, craft structure, they just don't really work for me on a practical sense. I do think it is important to read a lot as a writer, for one thing, and to think about what about particular books work, and to think about their story structures and so on and so forth, and think about when they don't work. But as far as sitting down and having an outline saying, at this point in the story, your character needs to do this, and at this point in the story, your character needs to realize this, and so on and so forth, that really doesn't work very well for me. And definitely nothing against folks that it does work well for, because I know that Save the Cat and Heroine's Journey, like a lot of those sort of story structure craft things are super helpful and can get people focused and get into writing really good stories. But for me, they don't really work very practically for me.
Okay, GD, do you have any craft book suggestions or?
Well, I recently bought Save the Cat because I just wanted to understand what was the hype, and I actually have it. One of the few books I have in physical copies. But the truth is, I think a series that's been at least helpful for me a lot is this thesaurus series that has like emotions thesaurus. It has like negative traits thesaurus, positive traits thesaurus. That are these books that help you build worlds or have vocabulary. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? So I have all that series as ebooks. I actually only have one of them as physical, which is the emotional thesaurus. And it actually has been very helpful. I have the same opinion as Nancy in the sense that I have the book and I want to read it to understand it. I work a lot with a very flexible 3-act structure. And I say very flexible because I read a little bit about the 3-act structure and just said, okay, this might help me structure the book in 3 parts so that I understand what's going on. But at the same time, what I actually really do is this, what Lou suggested, which is basically I just read books that I really like and decide how that worked out. And what I didn't even like about them. So one of the things that I discovered that is really common in series that I didn't like and I couldn't find a book to help me was I have a hard time reading and finishing series because I get bored after the second book of following the characters again. So I've been researching a little bit more in series that are overreaching, but have like an ending in each book, not standalones. You have to read the series, but each book will give you an ending. Okay, this character is done. Move, next group. Something like that. So even though I haven't read or have craft books, I do a lot of research online. I also have the whole Thesaurus series, which I really recommend, at least for me, who I always struggle with words and vocabulary. And I have nothing against them. The books, the same with Nancy, they don't really work for me. And I rather use inspiration of novels or books that I find interesting and go off with how they structure the book per se.
Okay, or MM. Sorry.
No worries.
I'm hungry. It's your turn, MA.
Okay. I also love the thesaurus, the traits of thesaurus, the emotional thesaurus. I have all of them, and I always go through and like dog ear the pages for like the character I'm writing their perspective from. I also really like this book. It was called Wonder Book. It's a fun book if you're world building or if you want to look at different story structures. I think it has a few of them in there and gives you great examples. I don't really follow any of them, but it's just really nice to look at for inspiration. It also covers like different kinds of dialogue, I think, as well, and like hooks and endings. So it's a good one. If you were gonna pick one, I'd say that would be the one.
I think I might have to look that one up. I don't think I've read that one. All right. Whitney, any books from you?
Yeah. Why am I
Whitney.
sideways?
It's okay. You did that. I was like, hey.
I don't know what's happening. Okay, there we go. So I've read Save the Cat. And I did find it interesting and helpful, and I do occasionally will go back to it for certain things if I'm finding like I'm kind of hitting a point where things just don't seem like they're flowing or it just isn't working. I'll go back to it and kind of reference it. I use it still for writing my blurbs because I hate writing blurbs and I find it helpful how they break it down. So I still use it for that. But I feel like when I read Save the Cat, I'd already written the Flames and Curses, so I went back and kind of I applied Saves the Cat to Flames and Curses and found that I pretty much followed that naturally. And I feel like, most of us probably do, because if we're writers, we're probably avid readers, and most books will follow that same, outline to an extent. And so I think just having read so many books, the pattern and everything that happens just kind of ingrains itself in your brain a little bit, and so it just kind of happens naturally almost. And so yeah, I mean, I have it and I will use it occasionally, but for the most part I feel like it just kind of comes if you know what your story is going to do, and I don't know. So yeah, it's helpful. It was good to read and I recommend it, but I don't use it to a T exactly. So
and for me, I have Save the Cat. I read Save the Cat, but I looked at and I like Save the Cat. I like the outline structure, and I still use the outline structure. But when I started reading it, I was like, oh wait, I'm already doing this. So like Whitney said, I compared the outline to some of my original work, and I was like, oh wait, that's what it is. But it's nice to have like words for it and to have like an explanation of why it works. And to even Save the Cat even talks about how, hi Sherlock, sorry, Sherlock just came in. Save the Cat even talks about how sometimes stories rearrange themselves and some beats get mashed together, and that was nice. So that's really the only craft book that I really like. I do like the sources; those are very helpful. I don't use them all that frequently. I don't know why. I just always forget to look at them. I've read Story Genius, which is that one it was the one that was like, oh, you need to write your last scene first or your big climax first. And I tried that and I was like, okay. But that one also had where they wanted you to write every scene on like cards, and I was like, this is too much. This is way too much structure for me. So yeah, I like Save the Cat. And I think that's it. I think that's all I've read. I do need to read more craft books. Oh, I read the 20 Master Plots or whatever, the book that has like all the plots in it. Okay. I was like, this is kind of helpful, not really. But yeah, so Save the Cat's my big recommendation for everybody. All right. Does anybody else have anything else they want to chat about while we're here? GD.
Why don't we just say what we're working on right now so we can close it? I'm suggesting it. Like, what is our current project?
That works. All right. So you round us off.
Okay. I'm currently working on book 2 of the Bound Island series, which officially has a title. Yay! And it will, yes, after a lot of calling it book 2 or B2, it has a title. I'm working on book 2. Very shortly going to go out to, probably in a couple of weeks, it will go off to betas. It has already been dev edited, so the betas are going to get the cleanest version possible of the book. The closest it is to a real book, they're going to get that as close as I can get it without formatting it. And I'm also want to finish that because I actually want to work on a contemporary romance. To clean a palette cleanser, I want to do one about a girl who's a mechanic, and with the guy that they're going to do one of these car competitions where they build a custom car for a competition. I have no idea how it's going to work out, but I really am interested in it. And those are my projects for now. And writing, and yeah, well, I also want to do other stuff, but writing for now, those are my 2 projects.
Okay, Emma, what are your current projects?
I just wrapped up my first draft of my 1.5 novella for the Traveler series. I'm currently doing my first crusty draft of book 2, and then I also have some side projects for when I'm burnt out on the Traveler series. Just like an epic fantasy and then a fantasy murder mystery. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, Whitney, what are your current projects?
I'm currently drafting the first draft of my Wizard of Oz reimagining. That is going to be Why Choose with Fae and dragons, or a dragon. And then once this month is over and my Tai Raimo is done, I will be going back to my edits of the last Fates book and the last Cursed Realms book.
Nancy, what are your current projects?
Well, as mentioned before, less a current project, but I do have the Mirror Guardian up there, you can see, which is coming out this week. But as for what I'm working on now, I am working on the 7th and final Red and Black book, which is also officially the most difficult book I have ever written. Series finales are always tough, and this definitely 7-book series finales are really tough. So it's been really challenging. Another work in progress that I have right now is a first book in kind of like a horror fantasy hybrid that I'm really excited about. And it has lots of possessions and violence and gore and body horror. And so I'm so excited to get to share that with people.
I see JD's going. So my current projects are, if you're not following me on Instagram and haven't seen the insanity that is me right now, I'm trying to finish up the Last in the Heir to Moondust series. I am trying to finish up the 2nd book in Sanctuary of the Lost, which is Of Hope and Blight. And I'm trying to finish up Elle and I's Romeo and Juliet retelling, reimagining Benvolio Mercutio Turn Back Time. Okay, so we're gonna just sign off. So GD, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram as GD Writes. I also have a TikTok, which I'm trying really hard to get back into, but I'm mostly on Instagram. I also have a webpage and a newsletter that's going to probably come out at the end of the month. And I love people chatting with me, so you guys can DM me and we can talk books, or it doesn't have to be my book. It could just be books because I really like reading. That's where I am right now.
Okay, where can everybody find you, MA?
I'm on Instagram at writer.m.a.brown. And then I have a website, which is mabrownauthor.com. And that's it. I keep my social media small.
And where can everybody find you, Whitney?
I am on Instagram, Whitney_Spradling_author. I'm also sort of kind of on TikTok, Whitney _Spradling _author. And then I have a website, whitneyspradlingauthor.com. And I do have a newsletter. If you sign up, you get the first chapter of Flames and Curses. And I promise I won't spam you because most of the time I forget to even send one out. So no worries there.
And Nancy, where can everybody find you?
I have a website. It's nancyotoole.wordpress.com. You can also sign up for my newsletter there. And I am on Instagram as well. That's really the only social media I'm using at this point. It's the only one I can stand. So I'm under Nancy's Views on Instagram.
And I am on Instagram at lou.wilham. I'm on TikTok, and I only use it whenever I feel like it. And I'm Lou_Wilham, and my website is louinprogress.com. And it has been great chatting with everybody. And yay, successful first round table. Can't you tell I'm done? So I'm gonna end it there. Bye, everybody.